There are moments in the long history of the Imperium when heroism and tragedy become inseparable, when the brightest flames of human determination illuminate the deepest shadows of despair. The First War for Armageddon in 444 UM41 stands as one such moment. A battle so savage, so costly, that the Inquisition itself chose to erase it from imperial records rather than let humanity remember what transpired on that blood-soaked world. This is the story of how 109 of the Emperor's finest warriors, the legendary Grey Knights, faced the demon Primarch Angron and his 12 greatest Bloodthirster champions. This is the story of a victory purchased with almost unimaginable sacrifice. This is the story of the day that silver armor turned red with the blood of heroes, and the Imperium learned that some threats can only be stopped, never truly defeated. To understand the horror that descended upon Armageddon, we must first understand the being at the center of the storm. Angron was not always a monster. Once he was one of the Emperor's own sons, a Primarch born to lead humanity to greatness. But fate, cruelty, and ultimately chaos itself conspired to transform him into something that bore only the faintest resemblance to what he might have been. When the infant Primarchs were scattered across the galaxy by the machinations of chaos, Angron fell to a world called Nuceria. It was a supposedly civilized planet, but civilization there wore a mask of brutality. The child Primarch was discovered by slavers who saw in this superhuman infant not a miracle to be cherished, but a commodity to be exploited. They dragged him to the gladiatorial pits where Nuceria's elite entertained themselves watching slaves fight and die for their amusement. Young Angron proved to be an extraordinary fighter, as all Primarchs were extraordinary at whatever they attempted. But he was also something his captors had not anticipated. He was compassionate. He cared for his fellow slaves. He fought not because he loved violence, but because he had no choice, and his victories in the arena brought him no joy. Only the hollow satisfaction of another day survived. The slave masters had a solution for this inconvenient conscience. They took the young Primarch and hammered crude neural implants directly into his brain. These devices, known as the butcher's nails, were archaeotech of the most barbaric kind. They rewired Angron's mind, amplifying his anger and rage while causing him agonizing pain whenever he was not fighting or killing. The nails turned a reluctant warrior into a berserker, transforming nobility into mindless fury with surgical precision. But even the nails could not completely destroy what Angron was. He organized a slave rebellion, leading his brothers and sisters in arms in a desperate bid for freedom. They fought their way out of the cities and made their stand in the mountains, knowing they faced certain death, but choosing to die free rather than live in chains. It was in those mountains that the Emperor finally found his lost son. What happened next has haunted the World Eater's Legion for 10,000 years. The Emperor did not land with his forces to fight alongside the rebels. He did not rescue Angron's companions, the men and women who had become his true family in the pits. Instead, he simply teleported Angron away, leaving his fellow slaves to be massacred by their former masters. The Emperor saved his son but abandoned everyone Angron had ever cared about. This betrayal poisoned everything that followed. Angron never forgave his father for that moment. The Emperor placed him in command of the 12th Legion, renaming them the World Eaters, apparently expecting his son to be grateful for the honor of leading warriors he had never asked for. But Angron could only see the faces of the family the Emperor had left to die in the mountains of Nuceria. His rage, amplified by the butcher's nails that could never be removed, found a target in the father who had stolen him away from his chosen death. The butcher's nails were slowly killing Angron, The crude technology was never meant to be implanted in a Primarch's brain, and it was causing catastrophic damage that even his superhuman physiology could not heal. By the time the Horus heresy erupted, Angron was dying, the nails having eaten away at his mind and body alike. It was Lorgar, Primarch of the Word-Bearers and a brother who had embraced the ruinous powers of chaos, who offered Angron what seemed like salvation. On the world of New Syria, where Angron had returned to take revenge on his former masters, Lorgar enacted a dark ritual. He used Angron's rage, his pain, his fury at the Emperor who had betrayed him as a conduit for the power of Khorne, the blood god. Through blood sacrifice and terrible magics, Angron was transformed into a demon prince. The being that emerged from Lorgar's ritual was no longer truly Angron. It was something greater and something infinitely lesser. The butcher's nails that had been killing him were now fused into his very essence, becoming part of his demonic form. The pain that had defined his mortal existence became eternal. But he also gained power beyond mortal comprehension. He became an avatar of Khorne's endless rage, a being of pure violence wrapped in demonic flesh. For 10,000 years after the heresy, Angron led his world eaters in an endless rampage across the galaxy. Based on accounts from those who faced him, he appeared no longer capable of the strategic thinking that had once made him an effective Primarch, however reluctantly. His consciousness seemed to flicker between moments of terrible clarity and periods of bestial fury where nothing remained but the urge to kill. He had become exactly what the butcher's nails had always been designed to create, a perfect weapon that knew nothing but rage. But in 444.M41, something drew Angron's attention to a specific target, the hive world of Armageddon, a vital industrial planet in the segmentum solar. The reasons remain unclear. Some believe it was the will of Khorne guiding his champion toward a world ripe for slaughter. Others suggest some fragment of strategic awareness still existed in Angron's fractured mind, recognizing Armageddon's strategic value. Or perhaps it was simply the promise of blood on an unimaginable scale, the kind of carnage that would please the blood god. Whatever drew him there, the demon Primarch gathered his forces and set course for Armageddon aboard the space hulk known as the Devourer of Stars. While Angron prepared his assault, the Imperium possessed a weapon specifically designed to combat threats like him. The Grey Knights were created by the Emperor himself during the final days of the Horus heresy, when he foresaw that even if Horus was defeated, the threat of chaos would remain forever. Working with Malcador the Sigillite, his most trusted advisor, the Emperor created a chapter of Space Marines unlike any other. Every Grey Knight was a psyker, their minds and souls forged to be anathema to the denizens of the warp. They were implanted with gene seed engineered directly from the Emperor's own genetic material, making them uniquely powerful among the Astartes. Their armor was blessed with wards and prayers that caused demons physical pain simply by being in their presence. Their weapons were force weapons, blades and hammers and halberds that could cut through the boundaries between dimensions and sever the connections that allowed demons to exist in real space. Most remarkably, in over 10,000 years of existence, not a single Grey Knight had ever fallen to chaos corruption. This perfect record of incorruptibility made them invaluable in the eternal war against the demonic, but it also made their losses catastrophic when they occurred. Each Grey Knight who fell represented years of training, genetic enhancement, and spiritual conditioning that could never be truly replaced. The Grey Knights operated in absolute secrecy from their fortress monastery on Titan, Saturn's largest moon. Their very existence was known only to the highest levels of the Inquisition and Imperial command. This secrecy was enforced with brutal efficiency. Any Imperial citizen who witnessed the Grey Knights in action would be mind-wiped or executed to prevent knowledge of demons from spreading. Even other Space Marine chapters were largely unaware that the Grey Knights existed. This policy of absolute secrecy stemmed from a dark truth about chaos. Knowledge of the demon could itself become a vector for corruption. Simply knowing that demons existed, that the warp could spawn horrors that violated the laws of reality, could make an individual more susceptible to the whispers of the ruinous powers. The Grey Knights therefore fought in shadows, their greatest victories unknown and unsung, their sacrifices unremembered by the very people they died to protect. The chapter was organized into brotherhoods, each commanded by a brother captain and consisting of approximately 100 warriors. These brotherhoods were the Grey Knights' primary tactical formation, combining enough psychic might to banish greater demons while remaining small enough to deploy rapidly to emerging threats. Each brotherhood specialized in different aspects of demon hunting, from surgical strikes against specific entities to large-scale purification campaigns that could take decades to complete. In 444.M41, when the first signs of Angron's invasion began manifesting on Armageddon, the Grey Knights were one of the few organizations in the Imperium that understood the true scope of the threat. A demon Primarch was not simply a powerful enemy. It was a violation of reality itself, a being whose very presence warped the fabric of space and time. If Angron was allowed to establish himself on Armageddon, his corruption would spread like a cancer, turning the entire world into a demon world where the laws of physics bent to serve the will of Khorne. The Space Hulk devourer of stars emerged from the warp in the Armageddon system. Like a diseased tumor, the massive conglomeration of fused starships appeared in orbit without warning, its arrival announced only by the psychic scream that rippled through the warp as billions of tons of corrupted metal tore through the barrier between dimensions. Within minutes of its arrival, the Space Hulk began disgorging its payload. Drop pods filled with World Eater's chaos Space Marines hammered into Armageddon Prime, the western continent of the planet's equatorial landmass. Cultists who had been planted on the world months in advance rose up in rebellion, turning nearly half the planetary defense force to the worship of Khorne. Demon hosts, mutants, beastmen, and hordes of lesser demons poured from the warp rifts that opened in the wake of Angron's arrival. Within days, Armageddon Prime was lost, its population of millions either slaughtered or corrupted, its cities burning with fires that would not be extinguished. The defenders of Armageddon Secundus, the eastern continent, prepared for the inevitable assault. They were bolstered by the unexpected arrival of Logan Grimnar, the great wolf of the Space Wolves chapter, who had brought 300 of his finest warriors to aid in the planet's defense. Grimnar understood that this was no ordinary chaos incursion. The presence of a demon Primarch meant that conventional tactics would be insufficient. He called upon the one force in the Imperium that specialized in combating such threats. The Grey Knights answered that call with a speed that bordered on the supernatural. Brother Captain Terramar Aureilian of the Third Brotherhood assembled every available warrior from across the chapter. They came from distant campaigns, from training on Titan, from wherever duty had taken them. 109 Grey Knights, many of them wearing the blessed Terminator armor that marked them as veterans of countless demon hunts. It was a significant portion of the chapter's total strength, deployed to face what was perhaps the most dangerous single entity the Imperium had encountered since the Horus Heresy. Among those warriors was a young recruit named Hyperion. He had only recently completed his transformation into a full battle brother and had yet to be tested in true combat. Hyperion was a psyker of unusual power, showing abilities that even the Grey Knight's extensive training had difficulty categorizing. He was classified as a mirror psyker, able to reflect and counter the psychic abilities of others. But there were hints of even greater potential lurking beneath the surface. His squad, designated Castian, was led by a veteran Justicar who had survived decades of service against the darkness. The plan Logan Grimnar proposed was as desperate as it was necessary. The Grey Knights would teleport directly into the center of Angron's advancing army and engage the Demon Primarch directly. This would allow the Space Wolves and Imperial Guard to launch a counterattack against the Chaos Forces while their attention was fixed on the silver-armored warriors who had appeared in their midst. It was a suicide mission disguised as a tactical maneuver, and everyone involved understood the reality beneath the strategic justification. But it was also the only option. Angron was advancing toward the hive cities of Armageddon Secundus with his personal guard of 12 Bloodthirsters. These were not merely greater demons, but the Cruor Praetoria, the 12 strongest servants of Khorne whose deeds and slaughter over 40,000 years had earned them positions as the Demon Primarch's personal bodyguard. Each Bloodthirster was a towering engine of destruction, as tall as a gunship, armed with demonic axes that could cleave through reality itself. If Angron reached the hive cities with this force intact, the slaughter would be unimaginable. Billions would die. The entire world would be corrupted beyond any hope of salvation. The only way to prevent this catastrophe was to stop Angron before he reached his objective. And the only force capable of accomplishing this was the Grey Knights. On the appointed day, as Angron's army surged across the ash wastes between Armageddon Prime and Secundus, 109 silver-clad warriors materialized in a perfect circle around the Demon Primarch. The teleportation was precise, coordinated across multiple squads with the kind of psychic synchronization that only the Grey Knights could achieve. For a single moment, there was silence as demons and space marines alike registered what had just occurred. Then the killing began. The Grey Knights struck with the precision that defined their chapter. Their storm bolters spoke in unison, blessed rounds hammering into demonic flesh with explosive force. Their force weapons blazed with psychic fire as they closed with their enemies. Litanies of banishment rolled across the battlefield, each word a psychic attack that caused the demons physical pain. For all their power, the Cruor Praetoria found themselves facing an enemy specifically designed to kill their kind. But Angron and his bodyguard were not ordinary demons. These were entities that had survived 40 millennia of warfare in the Materium and the Warp. They had shattered armies, toppled civilizations, and bathed entire worlds in blood. The Grey Knight's opening volley hurt them, wounded them, even banished some of the lesser demons that surrounded the Demon Primarch. But it did not stop them. Angron himself was a nightmare made flesh. Standing over 4 meters tall, his red skin decorated with brass armor and the skulls of his victims, he wielded a massive black blade forged by the Dark Mechanicum specifically for his use. This weapon, known simply as the Black Blade, was not merely a sword but a demon weapon of terrible power. Its edge could cut through anything, its touch could corrupt the soul, and a single stroke could kill multiple Space Marines even in Terminator armor. The Demon Primarch moved with speed that defied his massive size. His wings, bat-like and leathery, carried him across the battlefield in great leaps that covered dozens of meters. The Butcher's nails, now fused into his demonic form, drove him forward with endless fury. He did not simply fight, he reveled in the slaughter, each kill feeding the rage that sustained his existence in real space. The Cruor Praetoria fought alongside their master, with coordinated brutality that spoke of countless battles fought together. They formed a protective cordon around Angron, their axes and whips keeping the Grey Knights at bay while the Primarch selected his targets. When a Grey Knight squad attempted to flank the formation, 2 Bloodthirsters peeled off to intercept them. their combined assault overwhelming even the enhanced physiology and blessed armor of the Emperor's demon hunters. Brother Captain Aureilian directed the battle with the calm authority that came from decades of commanding the Emperor's finest. He rotated squads in and out of direct engagement, ensuring that no single unit was overwhelmed while maintaining constant pressure on the enemy. His tactical brilliance kept the Grey Knights in the fight far longer than should have been possible against such overwhelming opposition. But brilliance could only accomplish so much when facing a being like Angron. The demon Primarch's first serious strike came when he turned his attention to a squad attempting to engage one of his Bloodthirster bodyguards. 5 Grey Knights in Terminator armor, each a veteran of hundreds of battles, advancing in perfect formation with their force halberds raised. Angron covered the distance between them in 2 massive bounds, his wings carrying him over the intervening space. The black blade swept in a horizontal arc that seemed almost casual in its execution. All 5 Grey Knights died in that single stroke. The demon weapon cut through ceramite, through the blessed silver of their armor, through the flesh and bone and gene-enhanced organs beneath. The blade's touch corrupted even as it killed, leaving wounds that smoked with demonic fire. The souls of those warriors meant to return to the Emperor upon death were instead consumed by the black blade, fuel for the weapon's terrible hunger. This pattern repeated itself across the battlefield. Grey Knights fought with superhuman skill and absolute dedication, their psychic might inflicting wounds on the demons that would have killed lesser entities instantly. But every wound they inflicted was matched by losses among their own ranks. The Cruor Praetoria proved why they had earned their positions as Angron's chosen guards. Each Bloodthirster was a match for multiple Grey Knights, and there were 12 of them protecting their master. Squad Castian, including the young Hyperion, found themselves driven toward the heart of the melee by the press of battle. Their Justicar fell to a Bloodthirster's axe, the weapon shearing through his helmet and the enhanced skull beneath. Another brother was caught by a demonic whip, the weapon coiling around his leg and dragging him toward its wielder despite his desperate attempts to break free. The squad that had numbered 10 at the battle's start was reduced to half that number in minutes of fighting. They ended up facing Angron himself. The demon Primarch towered over them, his presence so overwhelming that even their psychic conditioning struggled to maintain coherence in the face of it. Up close, they could see the butcher's nails embedded in his skull, see the corruption that had transformed what had once been noble features into something bestial and terrible. They could feel the rage radiating from him like heat from a furnace, an emotion so pure and consuming that it seemed to have weight and substance. Angron attacked with the abandon of something that could not be killed. His black blade wove patterns of death in the air, each strike claiming another Grey Knight. Brother Dumenedon went down with his torso nearly severed. Brother Galeo's head rolled across the ash-covered ground, his body still standing for a moment before collapsing. Brother Enceladus was struck so hard that his armored form was hurled 20 meters to crash into the ground with bone-shattering force. Malchadiel, one of Hyperion's closest companions since their induction into the chapter, attempted to intercept the demon Primarch. His force halberd blazed with psychic fire as he swung at Angron's exposed side. The blow landed, cutting deep into demonic flesh, drawing black blood that hissed and steamed as it hit the ground. For a moment, it seemed the attack might actually slow the monster. Then Angron's fist closed around Malchadiel's helmet and crushed it like rotten fruit. The Grey Knight went down, his armor crumpled and leaking fluids that should have been contained. He was still alive, his enhanced physiology keeping him conscious even with catastrophic injuries. But he was out of the fight, helpless as the demon Primarch raised the black blade to deliver the killing stroke. This was the moment when Hyperion discovered what he truly was. Standing over his fallen brother, watching the black blade descend in an arc that would end Malchediel's life, something broke free inside Hyperion. Or perhaps it would be more accurate to say that something that had always been there finally found its moment. The young Grey Knight reached out with his psychic abilities, not with the careful control that training had instilled, but with raw desperation and absolute refusal to let another brother die. The black blade stopped in mid-swing. Angron's arm froze, muscles straining against an invisible force that held the weapon immobile. The demon Primarch roared, pouring his supernatural strength into forcing the blade downward. The black blade began to move again, inch by agonizing inch, but it was moving far slower than it should have. Hyperion was not stopping the blade through force. He lacked the raw power to physically halt a demon Primarch's strength. Instead, his abilities were working on a different level entirely. He was creating a psychic mirror, reflecting Angron's will back upon itself, turning the Primarch's own rage into an obstacle. The black blade was trying to move in two directions simultaneously, creating a stress point that even a demon weapon could not endure indefinitely. The effort was destroying Hyperion from the inside out. Blood poured from his nose, his ears, the corners of his eyes. His skull felt like it was splitting open from the pressure. Neural pathways that should have been protected by his enhanced physiology were burning out under the strain. He could feel himself dying, his enhanced biology unable to cope with what he was attempting. But he held on. Not because of training or discipline or even faith in the Emperor. He held on because Malchediel was his brother, because Squad Castian had been his family since his induction into the chapter, because in that moment nothing else mattered except keeping that blade from falling. The black blade cracked. A thin line of silver light appeared along its length, spreading like frost across glass. Angron's roar of fury turned to something approaching disbelief. In 10,000 years of existence, through countless battles against the Imperium's mightiest champions, no one had ever damaged his weapon. The blade was a gift from Khorne himself, forged in the blood god's own realm. It was supposed to be indestructible. Hyperion poured everything he had into that crack, widening it, forcing it to spread. His consciousness was fragmenting, pieces of his personality and memory burning away like paper in a fire. But he could feel the weapon beginning to fail, could sense the demon trapped within the blade shrieking as its prison started to crumble. With a sound like breaking crystal magnified 1,000 times, the black blade shattered. Shards of demonic metal scattered across the battlefield, each one dissolving into smoke as the binding that held them together failed. The demon within the weapon was cast back into the warp, its howl of rage and disbelief echoing across dimensions. Hyperion collapsed, blood pouring from every orifice, his psychic presence flickering like a candle about to go out. Malchediel managed to drag himself across the ground to cover his savior's unconscious form with his own broken body. Around them, the battle raged on, but something fundamental had changed. Angron no longer had his greatest weapon. The loss enraged him beyond measure, but it also made him vulnerable in ways he had not been since his ascension. The black blade had been part of him, an extension of his will and power. Without it, he was still a demon Primarch, still an engine of destruction that could kill space marines with his bare hands. But he was no longer invincible. Brother Captain Aureilian saw the opening and knew what he had to do. The ritual of banishment he had prepared required the caster to be in direct contact with the demon being banished. It required absolute focus and faith, leaving the caster completely vulnerable to attack. It would almost certainly result in his death. But with the black blade gone and Angron's attention focused on the fallen Hyperion, this moment represented the best chance they would have. The brother captain fought his way through the press of Bloodthirsters toward the demon Primarch. His own force sword cut a path through demonic flesh, each strike precisely placed to inflict maximum damage. He reached Angron just as the Primarch was turning toward him, saw recognition dawn in those hate-filled eyes, saw the demon begin to move to intercept. Aureilian was faster. His gauntleted hand locked onto Angron's arm, and he spoke the 808th word of the ritual of banishment. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Silver fire erupted from the point of contact, spreading across Angron's demonic form like a living thing. The demon Primarch screamed, a sound that shattered windows in hive cities dozens of kilometers away as his connection to the Imperium began to unravel. But banishing a demon Primarch was not like banishing a lesser entity. Angron had the will of Khorne himself sustaining his presence in real space. Breaking that connection required more than just words of power. It required sacrifice. Aureilian poured his own life force into the ritual, using his soul as fuel to power the banishment. His armor cracked and blackened, his flesh began to smoke. The gene-enhanced organs that had sustained him through centuries of warfare failed one by one. Angron fought back with everything he had, his claws raked across Aureilian's armor, tearing through ceramite to the flesh beneath. But the ritual had begun and could not be stopped. The demon Primarch's form was becoming translucent, his substance flickering between the material and immaterial. The crew Praetoria, seeing their master being dragged back into the warp, redoubled their assault on the Grey Knights, desperate to break through and save their lord. They failed. The surviving Grey Knights, though drastically reduced in number, held the line. They paid for every meter in blood, but they kept the Bloodthirsters from reaching their captain. Squad after squad went down, their last acts ensuring that Aureilian had the seconds he needed to complete the ritual. With a final word that was part prayer and part curse, Brother Captain Terramar Aureilian finished the banishment. Angron was torn from real space and hurled back into the warp, his scream of rage echoing across dimensions. The crew Praetoria, bound to their master's presence, were pulled after him. The entire host of demons that had accompanied the demon Primarch's assault began to dissolve, their connection to reality severed with Angron's departure. Aurelian's body burned beyond recognition by the energies he had channeled. Collapsed to the ground, he died knowing that his mission had succeeded, that Armageddon was saved, that the Grey Knights had fulfilled their purpose. When the Space Wolves and Imperial Guard forces arrived at the site of the battle, they found a scene that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. The ash wastes around Armageddon's equatorial jungles had been transformed into something resembling the surface of a demon world. The ground was scorched black from psychic fire. Pools of blood that steamed and hissed covered the landscape. The air itself seemed wounded, reality struggling to reassert itself after being so grievously violated. Among the carnage lay the bodies of Grey Knights. 96 warriors had fallen in the battle, their blessed armor cracked and broken, their gene seed beyond recovery in many cases. Those who survived were little better. 9 were so catastrophically wounded that they would never fight again, their injuries too severe for even the most advanced medical care to fully repair. Only 13 Grey Knights walked away from that battlefield with the ability to return to active duty. 13 survivors from a force of 109, an 88% casualty rate against a single enemy and his bodyguard. These numbers would seem catastrophic to any military force, but for the Grey Knights, they represented an almost unthinkable loss. Each fallen brother represented decades of training, centuries of accumulated experience in some cases, and gene seed crafted from the Emperor's own genetic material. The chapter would not fully recover from this blow for generations. Among the survivors was Hyperion, pulled from the edge of death by the chapter's medici. The psychic burnout he had suffered left him in a coma for 4 months, his mind fragmented and his body requiring extensive augmetic reconstruction. Half his face had to be replaced with metal and machinery. The neural damage was so severe that it was initially unclear whether he would ever wake up, much less return to duty. But when he did awaken, the Grey Knights recognized that something remarkable had occurred on Armageddon. Hyperion had accomplished what should have been impossible. He had damaged a demon Primarch's weapon through sheer force of will and psychic might. This feat earned him the title Bladebreaker from the Space Wolves who witnessed it, a name that would follow him through the rest of his service to the chapter. The Space Wolves also lost heavily in the First War for Armageddon, though not in the climactic battle against Angron. They had been holding the line against the rest of the Case army, buying time for the Grey Knights to do their work. Logan Grimnar himself had led charges across rivers of blood, his great company fighting with the savage fury that was the Space Wolves' hallmark. They succeeded in their objective, but hundreds of Space Wolves gave their lives in the process. For the defenders of Armageddon, the nightmare seemed to be over. The demon was banished, the Chaos forces were in disarray, and the Imperium's armies were pushing the remaining cultists and traitors back toward their drop zones. Victory was at hand. The world had been saved. Then the Inquisition arrived, and a different kind of horror began. The inquisitorial fleet that entered the Armageddon system was vast and merciless. At its head was Inquisitor Lord Gesme Kisneros of the Ordo Malleus, a man who had spent centuries enforcing the Imperium's strictest laws regarding chaos corruption. He brought with him not just inquisitorial forces but entire regiments of Imperial Guard, ships of the Imperial Navy, and even elements of other Space Marine chapters that owed favors to the Inquisition. His orders were simple and absolute. Every Imperial citizen who had witnessed the Grey Knights in action, every soldier who had fought alongside them, every civilian who had survived the Chaos invasion, they all had to be silenced. Knowledge of demons, knowledge of the warp's ability to spawn such horrors, was itself a form of corruption. Allowing that knowledge to spread was allowing chaos a foothold in millions of minds. The purge began with the military. Imperial Guard regiments that had fought heroically to defend their world found themselves disarmed and loaded onto transport ships. They were told they would be taken to processing centers for debriefing and award ceremonies. Instead, they were sterilized to prevent them from passing on any potential genetic corruption, then sent to inquisitorial work camps where they would labor until they died. No exceptions were made for valor or heroism. The punishment was the same whether you had broken and run or stood firm and fought to the last. The Navy crews that had witnessed the Grey Knights' arrival were dealt with more harshly. Their ships were destroyed in orbit, vaporized by Grey Knights strike cruisers acting under inquisitorial orders. Thousands died without ever understanding why, their only crime having been present when the silver-armored warriors materialized from the warp. The civilian population of Armageddon faced mass mind-wiping procedures. Entire cities were processed through facilities hastily constructed by the Inquisition, each citizen having their memories of the past months surgically excised from their minds. Many did not survive the procedure. Those who did emerged as shells of their former selves, unable to remember why they wept when they thought about the war. But the mind-wiping was not thorough enough for the Inquisition's liking. 3 entire worlds in the neighboring Tremaine sector were put to the sword. Billions died because a single company of stormtroopers stationed on those worlds had fought at Hell's Reach Hive alongside the Grey Knights. The Inquisition could not risk even the slightest chance that knowledge of the demon hunters might spread. This was when Logan Grimnar said no. The Great Wolf of the Space Wolves had lost hundreds of his warriors defending Armageddon. He had called for the Grey Knights' aid, had fought alongside them, had witnessed their sacrifice. He would not allow the people those warriors had died to protect to be slaughtered or enslaved for the crime of surviving. When inquisitorial forces arrived at the Space Wolves' position to mind-wipe his company, Grimnar personally threw the Inquisitor's representatives out of his command center. What followed became known as the Months of Shame, a period of increasingly deadly confrontations between the Space Wolves and the Inquisition. Grimnar attempted to evacuate Armageddon's civilian survivors, using his chapter's fleet to shield transport ships from inquisitorial interdiction. The Grey Knights, torn between their loyalty to the Inquisition and their respect for the Space Wolves who had fought beside them, found themselves caught in the middle. The conflict nearly erupted into full civil war. Inquisitor Lord Kisnaros assembled an armada including inquisitorial ships, the entire Red Hunters chapter, and Grey Knights vessels. They moved to blockade Fenris itself, the Space Wolves' home world, threatening orbital bombardment of the Fang if Grimnar did not submit to inquisitorial authority. The Great Wolf responded by recalling every Space Wolves company he could reach, preparing to defend his world against what he viewed as betrayal by the very Imperium he had sworn to serve. The siege of Fenris escalated into open battle. Logan Grimnar led 20 Terminator-armored Space Wolves in a teleport assault directly onto the bridge of the inquisitorial flagship Corell's Hope. In the brutal close-quarters fighting that followed, Grimnar personally slew Inquisitor Lord Kisnaros. The death of the operations commander, combined with the heavy casualties both sides were suffering, finally created the conditions for peace. It was Bjorn the Fell-Handed who seized that moment. The ancient dreadnought, one of the few surviving warriors who had fought alongside Leman Russ during the Great Crusade, teleported onto the bridge of Corell's Hope and demanded both sides stand down. His authority, earned over 10,000 years of loyal service, was enough to force a ceasefire. A compromise was reached, though it satisfied no one. The Space Wolves would keep their knowledge of the Grey Knights but would never speak of them to outsiders. The Inquisition would cease its attempts to purge the Space Wolves but would continue its work on Armageddon. Hyperion, recovered enough to return to limited duty, was sent to Fenris as part of the negotiations. The Space Wolves called him Blade Breaker, a title of respect that acknowledged what he had done on Armageddon. But within the Grey Knights, he struggled with what had been done in the aftermath of their victory. He had helped save Armageddon from a demon Primarch, only to watch the Inquisition destroy the lives of the very people he had fought to protect. The first war for Armageddon was expunged from official records. The survivors' memories were destroyed or locked away in inquisitorial vaults. Even on Armageddon itself, the population was taught that only 2 wars had ever been fought for their world. The sacrifice of 96 Grey Knights, the heroism of the Space Wolves, the billions who died in the Chaos Invasion, all of it was erased as if it had never happened. The first war for Armageddon reveals truths about the Imperium that many would prefer remain hidden. It demonstrates the terrible cost of fighting chaos, the impossible choices that must be made when confronting enemies that threaten not just lives but souls. But it also reveals the price of the Imperium's secrecy, the way fear of chaos can become as destructive as chaos itself. The Grey Knights paid for their victory in blood. 96 warriors dead, many of them veterans who had survived centuries of demon hunting. Their gene seed, crafted from the Emperor's own genetic material, was lost forever. The chapter would not fully recover from this loss for generations. Even today, over 1,000 years later, the names of those who fell are carved into the walls of Titan's crypts. Honored in death, if not in public memory, Brother Captain Taramar Aureilian gave his life to banish Angron, sacrificing himself to complete a ritual that required the caster's soul as fuel. His death was not unique among the fallen. Every Grey Knight who died on Armageddon did so, knowing that their sacrifice would never be publicly acknowledged, that their deeds would be erased from history, that they would be forgotten by everyone except their brothers on Titan. They accepted this fate because they understood that some wars must be fought in shadows, some victories must remain unsung. Hyperion survived, but the cost of shattering the Black Blade haunted him for the rest of his long service. The neural damage never fully healed. He would suffer seizures and blackouts for decades after Armageddon, his brain struggling to cope with what he had done to himself. But he also became one of the chapter's most valued members, eventually rising to become one of their prognosticars, psychically sensitive warriors who could sense demonic incursions before they fully manifested. His title of Bladebreaker became a legend, whispered among the few who were allowed to know of the Grey Knight's existence. The Space Wolves never forgot or forgave what happened after the battle. Logan Grimnar had lost brothers on Armageddon, had seen them die fighting to protect that world. To then watch the Inquisition slaughter the survivors those Space Wolves had died for was an insult and betrayal that could not be borne. The months of shame left scars on both the Space Wolves and the Grey Knights that have never fully healed. Even today, relations between the two chapters remain complicated, marked by mutual respect earned in battle and lingering anger over what came after. For Angron himself, the banishment was only temporary. The ritual that Aureilian performed cast him back into the warp for 100 years and a day, denying him the ability to manifest in real space for that duration. But a century is nothing to a demon. Angron would return, would lead other invasions, would bring his rage and his butchery to other worlds. The Grey Knights had won a victory, but they had not ended the threat. Perhaps they never could. Perhaps the best anyone could hope for when facing a demon Primarch was to delay them, to buy time for the next generation of warriors to prepare for the next inevitable confrontation. The first war for Armageddon teaches us that in the grim darkness of the far future, victory and tragedy are often indistinguishable. The Grey Knights succeeded in their mission. They stopped Angron, saved Armageddon from becoming a demon world, prevented Khorne from claiming billions of souls, but the cost was so high, the aftermath so brutal, that even calling it a victory feels like a mockery of those who died. This is the reality of fighting chaos. You can win the battle and still lose something precious in the process. You can save a world and still doom its people. You can be the heroes of humanity and still be forced to commit acts that no hero should ever contemplate. The Grey Knights understand this better than anyone. Every victory they achieve comes at a price that would break lesser warriors. Every demon they banish takes them one step closer to the day when there are not enough of them left to hold the line. 109 Grey Knights faced a demon Primarch and his 12 greatest champions on the ash wastes of Armageddon. 13 walked away. The math is simple and terrible, but those 13 carried with them the knowledge that their 96 fallen brothers had achieved something that no one else in the Imperium could have done. They had stopped Angron. They had saved a world. They had proven that even against impossible odds, even when facing enemies that seemed beyond mortal power to defeat, humanity could still prevail if warriors were willing to pay the price. That is the legacy of the first war for Armageddon. Not a tale of triumph, but a reminder that in a universe of endless war, every day the Imperium survives is bought with the blood of its defenders. The Grey Knights understand this truth in their souls. They carry it with them into every battle, knowing that the next one might be the day their number is finally called. But they go anyway because someone has to stand between humanity and the darkness. Someone has to be willing to pay the price, no matter how high it climbs. If you enjoyed diving deep into this tragic chapter of Imperial history, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We've got plenty more stories from the grim darkness of the far future, each one exploring the heroes, villains, and impossible choices that define Warhammer 40k. The Imperium endures because warriors like the Grey Knights refuse to stop fighting, no matter the cost. And we'll keep telling their stories for as long as there are stories left to tell. For the Emperor, for Titan, for those who fight in shadows so that others might live in light.